There are wounds, invisible to the eye. They lie deep within the heart, where memories and pain intertwine, where we've been betrayed, lost someone we loved, or perhaps we were the ones who love over resentment. Such stories are like small candles, lighting up the darkest corners of the human heart. Today, you will hear 3 Buddhist stories about forgiveness. Stories that may. Midnight in a quiet suburb of Manchester. The streets were wrapped in a soft drizzle, the kind that blurs everything into a haze of silver light beneath the flickering street lamps. Inside a small house at the corner of Maple Street, a woman named Eleanor Hayes was still awake. The faint hum of the washing machine filled the silence as she folded her son's school uniform. Her 12-year-old boy, Oliver, had fallen asleep on the couch with his homework still open, a sketch of a paper airplane on the corner of the page. Eleanor smiled gently, brushing a lock of hair. Phone rang. "Mrs. Hayes?" A voice on the other end said, trembling. "This is Officer Nolan. There's been an accident on the Westbridge Road. We need you to come immediately." The world seemed to stop spinning. The air, the walls, even her heartbeat froze. Her hands shook as she grabbed her coat. Within minutes, she was driving through the rain, the wipers thrashing wildly, her mind screaming. Was being handcuffed, reeking of alcohol, eyes glassy, mumbling incoherently. Eleanor didn't see him at first. She saw only the small shoe lying in the road, her son's. "Oliver," she screamed. Grief made flesh. The next few days blurred into one long, endless night. The funeral came under gray skies. Friends and relatives whispered condolences, but nothing could touch the hollow inside. The house felt unbearably quiet. The laughter, the footsteps, the soft hum of her son's favorite song, all gone. She would find herself standing at his door, expecting to hear him call Mom. How could sorry ever undo the sight of her child lying lifeless under a white sheet? When the judge read the verdict, 5 years in prison, Eleanor didn't move. Around her, people murmured, "World, my love." Her tears fell silently, and somewhere in that stillness, she felt something break. Not the pain, but the person she used to be. Weeks turned into months. Life went on for everyone else, but Eleanor's world stayed frozen in that moment. She quit her job at the local library. She stopped answering calls. The only place she went was the cemetery, where she would sit for hours, and whispered something Eleanor couldn't hear. Their eyes met for a brief moment, his full of shame, hers full of fire. She turned and walked away without a word, her heart pounding with rage and confusion. That night, she couldn't sleep. His face haunted her, not the monster she had imagined, but a boy barely older than her son, broken, hollow, destroyed in his own way. A question began to echo in her mind, one she didn't want to ask. What if he's also living his own kind of hell? But before she could answer it, she pushed it away, clutching her son's photograph to her chest. No, the fire of hatred. She rose out of anger. It was anger that fed her, that burned everything else to ash. The nights her son called Mom, the math notebooks filled with messy numbers, the muddy shirts after a day of rain. All of it came back like a cruel reel of film she couldn't turn off. She swore to herself that the boy who took her son's life would never know peace. The sentence the court handed down, 5 years, was nothing but mockery. If the law won't bring justice, she muttered to herself in the dark, then I will. In the weeks following the trial, Eleanor's grief hardened into obsession. She visited lawyers, demanded every loophole, every possible appeal. She wrote letters to his university, to his neighbors, to anyone who would listen. She wanted him stripped of everything, his reputation, his future, his right to walk among decent people. He should pay with his whole life, she would whisper, her eyes glittering like cold steel. The neighbors began to notice. Some pitied her, others avoided her. She's changed since Oliver died, they whispered. But Eleanor no longer cared about whispers. Every morning she sat at her. Moments, she sometimes caught the faint echo of regret inside herself, but she drowned it with fury. Regret is for the weak, she told herself. At night, she dreamed of vengeance. She saw herself standing in a square as the young man, Daniel, was made to kneel before the crowd. In her dreams, she heard the roar of the people demanding justice. When she woke, the satisfaction dissolved into drumming on the metal railing. The water below reflected her pale face. If I could trade my life to bring him back, she whispered, I would. But if not, then he will pay. Her voice cracked, swallowed by the sound of rain. Reporters began to call. They wanted her story, her pain, to fill their evening shows. She agreed, thinking maybe she could turn tragedy into a warning about drunk driving. She sat before cameras, her hands clenched, her words trembling but sharp. When she got home and saw herself on screen later that night, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Hollow eyes, tight lips, the look of someone living for vengeance alone. Then one foggy morning, something unexpected happened. As she walked past a flower shop, a bus stopped nearby. Their eyes met. He smiled gently. Good morning. You're the mother of the boy from number 12, aren't you? I often see you at the cemetery on Saturdays. Eleanor froze. Yes, she said, startled. I'm Oliver's mother. He nodded. I am called Brother Anlak. I've watched you bring flowers each week. Sometimes, grief walks so close behind anger that we mistake one for the other. She laughed bitterly. Anger is the only thing keeping me alive, brother. He didn't argue. He only asked softly, if your anger could bring your son back, would you trade your life for it? The question hit her like a stone dropped into still water. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Something in her chest shifted, a small tremor of truth she didn't want to face. Brother Anlak continued, there's an old story that says anger is like a seed planted deep in the earth. You may think you control it, but it grows roots that choke everything else. Eventually, nothing good can grow in that soil again. His words were simple, almost childlike, but they cut through her armor. She wanted to scream at him. I don't care if the soil dies. I just want him to suffer. But the words caught in her throat. The monk didn't flinch. I'm not asking you to forget. Forgetting isn't healing. I'm saying that understanding can open a door, not to erase pain. But you won't be imprisoned with him. He didn't stay long. He picked up a wilted bouquet from a nearby bench, replaced it with a fresh one, and walked away in silence. The days after that encounter, laughing down the street, the smell of warm bread from the bakery across the road. She still plotted, still burned, but in the ashes there was now a small, unfamiliar spark, not hatred, but curiosity. Weeks later, a letter arrived. It was from Daniel. The handwriting was shaky. I see his face every night. I can't sleep. I don't know if there's any way to make amends. Then prison. She brought the letter to Brother Anlak, half to test him. He says he's sorry, she said coldly. What will your wisdom say to that? The monk read it silently, then placed it down. He suffers, too, he said softly. That won't bring your son back. But if his suffering can awaken compassion, then something good may still grow from this pain. Suffering, she spat. The cold stone. The rain had stopped, and the night was still. Oliver, she whispered, I don't know what to do anymore. I only know that I love you. Her tears came again, heavy and shaking, but, she said, I'll keep living, my darling, carrying you with me always. Chapter 3, The Light. Light does not arrive as a dazzling miracle. It comes in small, hesitant steps, not to erase the scars. When Jack was transferred to the hospital and Eleanor saw his face clearly for the first time, she thought she would only see a criminal, someone she needed to hate so that her pain had somewhere to live. But the longer she looked, the more she saw not only guilt but something deeper, brokenness, fear, and something she had never imagined, enduring remorse. The nights Jack couldn't sleep, Eleanor visited the hospital as if she were a witness revisiting a crime scene. She observed, asked questions, spoke of Tom in a cold tone, his hobbies, his drawings, his innocent laughter, as if reciting evidence to remind the world that her son once lived. Jack listened, eyes wet, never interrupting. He didn't beg, didn't justify. He simply let the words burn through him, like fire. Something I can do, to make amends, even a little. Eleanor wanted to shout that nothing could make up for what he had done, but her eyes fell on a paper airplane still sitting in her bag, one that Tom had folded long ago. The simple image stirred something deep within her, a memory of a boy who once loved without condition, who taught her that forgiveness was another form of courage. She sighed. Just one thing, she said quietly. But if you do it with sincerity. Jack nodded, as if she had handed him a fragile thread to hold on to. That one thing began simply. Jack started volunteering at a center for underprivileged children, the the kind of place Tom would have adored. It didn't erase the past, but it gave his remorse structure, transforming it from self-punishment into quiet service. Eleanor didn't join him right away. She went occasionally, standing at the back of the room. The first time she saw Jack kneel to help a small boy draw, his hand trembling, she noticed a smile flicker across his face, faint but real. There was something painfully beautiful about that image, a man once responsible for death now learning, with shaking hands, to nurture life. People talked. The neighbors whispered that she was humiliating herself by forgiving him. Some called her weak, others foolishly saintly. But Eleanor no longer sought anyone's approval. She wasn't doing this to look virtuous. She simply needed something that would keep her humanity intact amid the ruins. Over time, care became routine. She learned to change the bandage on Jack's arm, to cook meals he could stomach, to bring him warm tea on cold nights. These small acts were not grand gestures of redemption. They were steady beats of a heart learning to open again. Jack, in turn, didn't ask for pity. He worked silently, letting his actions speak. One evening, as winter pressed in, he finally told her about that night. Words he had never spoken aloud, even in court. "I had been drinking," he began, voice hoarse. "I thought I was fine to drive. I didn't see him until it was too late." There was a sound, metal, a scream, then silence. "And I saw him, the boy, lying there, his little hat in the road. I ran, not because I feared prison, but because I couldn't face what I'd done." Eleanor sat frozen, tears streaming without her, realizing she had once imagined punishing him until he begged for death. But as she listened, she saw that he already lived in a cell of his own making, one built of guilt, nights without sleep. Organized the events, cooking meals for the kids, fundraising for supplies. Their connection grew not through forgiveness spoken aloud, but through the quiet rhythm of doing good together. One afternoon, she watched him kneel beside a little girl, showing her how to draw a sun. The scene stirred something within her, not joy, not peace exactly, but a tender ache that no longer burned. It was the ache of love transformed. Some nights were still hard. There were mornings Eleanor woke furious again, wanting to hate, to walk away. There were still whispers in town, still judgment. But when she thought of her son, the boy who loved laughter and light, she knew she couldn't live forever inside darkness. Years later, Jack opened a small art program for children in poor neighborhoods. Eleanor helped him run it, quietly, steadily. The walls filled with drawings, stars, dreams, airplanes. One cold morning, they went together to Tom's grave. Jack laid a small wreath and whispered, "I'll spend what life I have left making it right." Eleanor placed her hand gently on his shoulder and murmured, "And I'll spend mine making sure love still lives." They left in silence, not the silence of grief, but of understanding. The light had not erased the darkness, but it had softened its edges. Their story never became famous, never turned into a miracle tale. It was simply the story of two broken souls who dared to choose meaning over misery. And on Tom's grave, a single paper airplane rested, its creases still marked by a child's hand. It did not soar, but it remained, a fragile testament that love, once real, can outlast even death, and that light, however faint, can still guide the hearts willing to change. Story 2. The Prisoner and the Young Man Who Visited Every Week. Chapter 1. The Lonely Prisoner. Thomas Reed was no longer Thomas Reed in the eyes of most people. In the prison records, he was just a number. In the early days, Thomas wanted to scream. He wanted the world to know he was guilty, that he deserved the hatred and scorn, but screaming did nothing. It didn't heal the wound, it only added more noise to the silence. Those around him treated him as something other than human, or worse, as the embodiment of his crime. Fellow inmates avoided his gaze. Guards nodded coldly when he passed. Meals were eaten in silence. He remembered her face vividly. The woman, the raincoat, the scream. Those flashes replaying in his mind until sleep became impossible. One winter morning, when mist still clung to the prison fence, Thomas walked into the workshop. Metal glinted under fluorescent light, the sound of machines humming like an industrial hymn. Marcus, a younger inmate, came over. Marcus often smuggled in an old radio to play during lunch breaks, sharing bits of the outside world. "Why don't you join us for soccer, old man?" Marcus asked, flashing a youthful grin. Thomas shook his head. "I don't deserve to." Marcus frowned slightly, but didn't mock him. "You don't have to deserve fun," he said, then shrugged and walked off. For a moment, Thomas watched him. That easy joy, that freedom of someone who still believed life could be kind. It hurt, in a way he hadn't expected. In those early years, Thomas lived like a ghost. He spoke little, laughed never, and avoided the small dramas of prison life. He simply existed, a man carrying a stone no one else could see. During visiting hours, he sat in front of the glass, waiting. Sometimes people came. Unfamiliar faces from charity groups, volunteers, strangers. Sometimes no one did. He would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, thinking of that night. How could a few drinks destroy an entire life? How could one reckless moment erase love, laughter, a home? Then one day, a letter arrived. Folded neatly, written in shaky handwriting. "We come to see you every week. You don't need to reply. We're just a kind stranger." Whoever it was, those few words felt like a spark of warmth in the cold void. Soon, rumors spread. "They say a kid's been coming to visit him," one inmate whispered. "Hey, kid, what kind of parent lets a child visit a murderer?" Another sneered. The guards said nothing. If it helped calm the man, they wouldn't stop it. But Thomas's heart twisted. He didn't know whether to dread or to hope. The following week, during visiting hours, a boy appeared, maybe 10 years old, in a worn jacket, holding a box of crayons. He stood before the glass, eyes wide and clear. "My name's Sam," he said. "She told me to come." "Who's she?" Thomas asked softly. "A lady named Lynn. She said someone needs someone to listen." Thomas smiled faintly, awkwardly, as if something inside him cracked for the first time in years. Their first meeting was short, clumsy. Sam didn't ask about the crime, the trial, or the reasons. He just talked about school, about his dog, about his bike. Thomas listened, really listened, as though drinking from a well after years in the desert. When Sam stood to leave, he said simply, "I'll come back next week." Those words echoed in Thomas's chest long after the door closed. Sam kept his promise. He returned every week. Sometimes he brought drawings, sometimes cookies, sometimes notes from Miss Lynn. Each visit was a small light in Thomas's darkness. Sam never judged. He didn't ask to know the story. He only shared pieces of his world, a song from school, a story about a cat stuck in a tree. The relationship drew attention. Some guards admired the boy's courage. Others called it foolish. But Sam didn't care, and Thomas didn't explain. Then one day, Sam handed him a card. On the cover, "For someone who has endured." Inside were the words, "We know you live with regret. We're not here to judge. Just to remind you, someone remembers you." It was signed by a small local volunteer group. Thomas read it over and over. His heart trembled. That cold, unbroken silence inside him began to thaw. One day, Sam looked up and asked, "Do you want to tell me about that night?" The question struck like lightning. No one had ever asked that before, not with gentleness, not without judgment. Thomas hesitated. To tell it would mean reliving it, confronting the man he had been. But each week, the question lingered, gentle but steady. Finally, one day he nodded, and he spoke. Slowly, haltingly, he told the story, the drinks, the laughter, the car, the scream, the horror, and the running. His voice broke as he remembered the small hat that flew into the road. Sam listened silently, not flinching. When Thomas's voice faltered, the boy reached out and placed his small hand on the glass, a simple, human gesture that pierced years of isolation. From then on, the telling became a ritual, painful but cleansing. Thomas realized something profound. Being heard was a form of redemption. Sam didn't forgive, didn't absolve, but he listened. And somehow that was enough. Months later, Thomas was allowed into a supervised work release program. It was a small freedom, but when he stepped into the open air and sunlight hit his face, he almost cried. Sam ran up and grinned. "You'll be okay, Mr. Reed." Thomas smiled, awkward and true. Some in town criticized the arrangement. "It's wrong," they said. "You can't let a child near a killer." Others quietly admired the strange bond. Thomas took it all in silence. He didn't expect understanding anymore. But each time Sam's small hand touched his arm, he felt a fragment of the man he once was, not the monster the world remembered. One afternoon, Sam brought him a small note. Miss Lynn said you should keep this, the boy said. It read, "Remorse is not meant to destroy you, but to lead you to right action." Thomas read it again and again. It was like seeing his life. He thought of how remorse, when turned inward, eats the soul, but when turned outward, becomes compassion. As the light went out, he whispered into the dark, "If I ever can, I'll make it right." And for the first time in years, he meant it. A seed of hope, fragile but real, began to grow in the heart of a man once thought lost forever. Chapter 2. The Mysterious Child. The guards at Greenwall Prison had long grown used to the sight of a small figure waiting outside the iron gates every Sunday morning. A boy, no more than 10 years old, always clutching a small brown paper bag. He would stand quietly, his face half hidden beneath a worn cap, and when the bell struck 10, he would ask in a soft voice, "Can I see Mr. Thomas Hale, please?" At first, the prison staff thought it was a mistake. No one ever visited Thomas Hale. Since the day he was sentenced, he had rejected all contact from the outside world. His family had disowned him. His friends had disappeared, and even the pastor who once tried to reach out had been met with cold silence. But for some reason, this boy kept coming back, week after week, without fail. Inside his cold, narrow cell, Thomas often sat staring at the wall. The days had long ceased to have meaning. The ticking of the old clock in the corridor was the only sound that reminded him time still existed. When the guard came one morning and said, "You've got a visitor," he frowned. "I told you, I don't want anyone here. It's a kid. Comes every week." A kid? Thomas raised his head. For the first time in days. What could a kid possibly want from me? But the guard only shrugged and opened the door. "Maybe you should find out." In the visiting room, separated by a pane of scratched glass, Thomas saw him. A boy with dark brown hair and large eyes that carried a strange calmness. He wasn't afraid, nor judgmental, just quietly looking at the man on the other side. "Why are you here?" Thomas asked, his voice rough. The boy smiled faintly. "I brought you something." He lifted the brown paper bag and pressed it against the glass. Inside was a sandwich and a few oranges. Thomas's jaw tightened. "You came all the way here for that?" The boy nodded. "You look like you haven't eaten well." Thomas almost laughed, but it came out as a bitter scoff. "You don't even know who I am." The boy's eyes softened. "I know enough." For a moment, silence stretched between them. The guard tapped his watch, signaling time was almost up. The boy stood, gave a small wave, and said, "See you next week." That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He didn't know why, but the image of the boy's calm eyes lingered in his mind. The next Sunday he waited, though. He told himself he wasn't. Yet when he heard footsteps echoing down the hallway, his heart beat faster. Again, the same voice. "Can I see Mr. Hale?" The visits became routine. Every Sunday. Without fail, the boy would come. Sometimes he brought bread, sometimes old books. They rarely spoke much. Thomas, once so hardened and distant, began to ask questions. "Where are your parents? Why do you come here?" The boy only smiled. "My mother says everyone deserves someone who believes they can be better." Thomas frowned. "Your mother sounds naive." "Maybe," the boy replied. "But she says forgiveness makes the world less heavy." Weeks turned into months. Thomas found himself waiting for those short visits. He cleaned his cell more often, started eating again, even began to read. But something inside him wrestled with unease. Who was this child? Why him? One rainy Sunday, the boy came soaked, his clothes clinging to his small frame. Thomas leaned forward, concerned despite himself. "You shouldn't have come today. It's pouring out there." The boy smiled, teeth chattering slightly. "I promised I'd come every week." Thomas's chest tightened. He wanted to say something, but words failed. The guard interrupted, calling time, and as the boy stood to leave, he turned and whispered something almost lost beneath the noise of the rain. "My dad used to say the same thing you did, that some mistakes can't be forgiven. But I think he was wrong." The next second, the door closed behind him, leaving Thomas frozen, his breath caught in his throat. His heart pounded with an unfamiliar ache, one that felt dangerously close to hope, and to something even more frightening, recognition. That night, he lay awake, replaying the boy's words over and over again. Each syllable seemed to echo from a place he had long buried deep inside himself. For the first time in years, Thomas Hale felt afraid, not of punishment, not of death, but of the possibility that forgiveness might truly exist and that it was now standing right in front of him every Sunday in the form of a child who refused to stop coming. Chapter 3. The Truth and Liberation. That morning, as the sunlight filtered through the narrow iron bars of the prison window, Lucas sat silently on his bunk, staring at the familiar shadows on the wall. The faint scent of damp concrete mixed with the rust of metal made the air heavy. Yet in his heart, there was a strange calmness, something he hadn't felt in years. The boy was coming again today. The guards already knew about it. Every Friday afternoon, that small figure would appear at the gate with a bag of homemade cookies or a simple book. No matter the rain or heat, he always came. No one knew who he was, and Lucas himself had never dared to ask. That day, when the child arrived, his steps seemed slower, his eyes deeper. The boy placed the small bag on the table and sat across. From Lucas, there was a long silence. Only the faint hum of the fan and the distant sound of footsteps filled the air. "Mr. Lucas," the boy began softly, "can I ask you something?" Lucas nodded, feeling a lump forming in his throat. "Do you remember the night of May 14th, 12 years ago?" The question struck him like lightning. His hands trembled. He lowered his gaze, unable to meet the boy's eyes. "Yes," he whispered. "That night, I remember every detail. I've spent every day since then trying to forget, but I never could." The boy's fingers clenched slightly. He took a deep breath. "That was the night my father died." Lucas's face turned pale. He looked up in shock, his lips trembling. "Your father?" The boy nodded slowly. His eyes, though still young, carried the weight of something much older. "My father's name was Daniel," he continued. "He was just driving home from work when it happened. You were drunk, weren't you?" Lucas couldn't speak. Tears welled up in his eyes. His chest felt like it was being crushed. "I wanted to hate you," the boy said, his voice trembling. "For years, I wanted to. Every time I saw my mother crying alone, every time I saw his empty chair at the table, I thought if I could meet you one day, I would scream at you. I would throw every word of pain I could find." He stopped. The boy's shoulders shook. Lucas tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "I deserve that," Lucas said hoarsely. "I destroyed your life. I destroyed your family. Every day, I wish it had been me instead of him." The boy looked at him, tears finally falling down his cheeks. "Then why did I keep coming here?" he asked softly. "I asked myself that again and again. Why did I come to see the man who took everything from me?" He wiped his face with his sleeve. "But every time I saw you sitting there, alone, I saw something else. I saw a man who was already in his own prison long before these walls. A man who couldn't forgive himself. And somehow, I stopped hating you." Lucas lowered his head, tears falling silently onto his trembling hands. The air was thick with the weight of years unspoken. "I'm not here to punish you, Mr. Lucas," the boy continued. "I came to forgive you." Lucas froze. The words echoed through his heart like a bell. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. The boy's voice softened. "Because I realized, if I keep holding on to hatred, then I'm no different from the pain that created it. My father wouldn't want that. He was a kind man. He used to tell me, if someone hurts you, don't let that hurt turn you into someone else. So today, I want to do what he would have done." He stood up, reached across the table, and gently placed his hand over Lucas's trembling one. "I forgive you." Something broke inside Lucas. Years of guilt, anger, and despair dissolved into tears that came uncontrollably. He pressed his forehead to the boy's hand and sobbed. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said between sobs. "I took a life. I took his life. And yet," the boy said gently, "you're still here. That means life is giving you a chance to make something good from what's left." The room seemed to grow brighter, though the light hadn't changed. The boy withdrew his hand slowly, leaving behind warmth that Lucas hadn't felt in decades. From that day on, Lucas began to change. The guards noticed he no longer snapped in anger or sat alone for hours. He started joining the others in the library, teaching some of them how to read, helping to fix broken chairs, writing letters for inmates who couldn't spell. Every week, the boy still came. But now, their conversations were different. They spoke about forgiveness, about how hard it is to truly let go, and about the people we hurt, and those we can still help. Months later, Lucas was released. He walked out of the prison gates under the same sunlight he once thought he'd never see again. Waiting outside was the boy, now taller, standing beside his mother. Lucas hesitated, unsure whether he should approach. But the woman nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. Daniel would have wanted this, she said softly. Lucas bowed his head deeply, tears streaming down. I will spend the rest of my life honoring his memory, he whispered. The boy smiled, a smile that seemed to dissolve all shadows of the past. Then you've already started, Mr. Lucas. They stood there, 3 lives once shattered by a single night, now connected by something far greater than punishment or revenge. The sky above was vast and clear, and for the first time in many years, Lucas felt the meaning of the word freedom. Not the kind that opens gates, but the kind that opens hearts. Story 3. The Last Words Before Death of an Abandoned Father. Chapter 1. The Father and the Closed Room. His name was Henry Collins, though most of the old letters that still bore his handwriting were simply signed H. Collins, the man who left. In the small town where he lived, his name had become something like a whisper from the past. Collins? Oh, the one who walked away. That phrase had followed him for decades, like a mark he could never wash off. Now, with hair almost completely white and veins showing beneath paper-thin skin, Henry lived alone in a single-room apartment on the top floor of an aging building. The room was narrow and dimly lit, with only a worn armchair, a half-broken bookshelf filled with a few old novels, and a dusty radio that played the same melodies he had loved in his youth. Near the window stood a framed photograph, a man and a little boy smiling in front of a cafe, sunlight on their faces. Henry rarely looked at it for long. The boy was Oliver, his son, his tiny hand clutching an ice cream cone, his face dusted with flour. That picture was a knife, beautiful, but sharp enough to draw blood. Years ago, when his wife, Margaret, was still alive, life was modest but warm. They had shared cheap meals, laughter, and the soft chaos of a child running through the house. But Henry had always been restless, chasing dreams that had no real shape. When an opportunity to work abroad appeared, and a woman whispered comfort into his ear, he chose escape. One rainy night, he walked out the door and never came back. He told himself it was for a better life. But the better life dissolved into years of moving, drinking, and working odd jobs. He stopped writing. He didn't call. He simply let silence take his place. By the time he realized what he had done, it was far too late. Oliver grew up without a father. Margaret carried the weight of both roles, a mother and a provider. When little Oliver once asked, "Where's Dad?" she only said, "He's gone, sweetheart." The boy didn't cry. He didn't understand. But something inside him closed. Years passed. Oliver became a man, successful, disciplined, guarded. The name Henry Collins was one he refused to utter. Letters from his father, if any arrived, stayed unopened in drawers. To him, the man was gone long ago, and the world had no space for ghosts. Meanwhile, Henry aged in silence. The days blurred together, long mornings, quiet meals, endless nights. He told himself this loneliness was his punishment. But punishment isn't the same as redemption. He learned that every time he sat by the window and listened to his own breathing echo off the walls. When illness came, weak lungs, erratic heartbeat, it felt almost deserved. One evening, after a coughing fit, Henry looked into the mirror and whispered, "What have I done?" The question lingered in the air, unanswered, heavy. The glass reflected not the man he once was, but a stranger hollowed by regret. He began to write a letter, just one page, trembling words on yellow paper. "I'm sorry. I would like to see you before I die. No excuses. No stories. Only truth." He mailed it and waited. Days became weeks. No reply. No visit. Only silence, the kind that fills a man until he feels transparent. One morning, on his way home from the grocery store, Henry collapsed. A young man passing by called an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed heart failure and advised him to stay. Lying on the bed, hooked to monitors, he realized that the sterile air, the smell of disinfectant, might be where his life ended. The nurse, looking through his ID, made a few calls. One of them reached Margaret. She listened quietly, said only, "I see." Later that night, Oliver heard about it. For hours, he sat in silence. He remembered the rain the night his father left, his mother's trembling shoulders, the hunger, the fear, the long years of pretending not to care. Now the man who caused all that was dying, asking to see him. Did he owe him that? When Oliver finally arrived at the hospital, the corridors were quiet, the walls white and cold. He stopped at the door, hesitant. Inside, Henry lay still, breathing through a nasal tube. The sight was jarring. The man who had once seemed so tall now looked fragile, almost translucent. Henry opened his eyes. For a moment, he seemed unsure whether the figure before him was real. "Oliver," he whispered, barely audible. Oliver didn't speak. His face was unreadable, not angry, not kind, just distant. Margaret stood beside him, her eyes red, her hand gripping her son's tightly. The doctor spoke softly, explaining Henry's condition, how his heart was failing. "He needs surgery if we want more time," the doctor said. Oliver nodded mechanically. Time. That was all they ever lost. That night, the two sat in silence until Henry spoke again, voice trembling. "Son, I was wrong." Each word fell like a stone. Oliver's lips tightened. "Wrong?" he said quietly. "You left us. You made Mom cry for years. You don't get to fix that with a few words." Henry closed his eyes, nodding. "I know," he whispered, "but I wanted you to know that I see it now." Margaret placed her hand on Oliver's arm. "Listen to him," she said softly. "You don't have to. Forgive. Just listen." Oliver inhaled deeply. In his mind, he was a boy again, standing in that doorway watching his father disappear. But in front of him now was not that man. It was someone. Smaller, older, breaking down. "If you're really sorry," he finally said, "then don't run again. Stay. Face it." Henry looked up, eyes wet, and smiled faintly. "I'll stay," he said, "even if it's too late." In the days that followed, Oliver began visiting. They didn't talk much at first. Sometimes, they just sat together, the beeping monitor keeping time. Then, gradually, the words came. Henry spoke of the past, not to excuse himself, but to own it. Oliver listened, his anger thawing into something unfamiliar, pity, maybe, or understanding. One morning, Henry asked the nurse for the old photograph. When she handed it to him, he looked at it for a long while before whispering, "I missed so much, didn't I?" Oliver didn't answer, but he stayed. That afternoon, Henry said, "You had to grow up too fast because of me." "I did," Oliver replied, his voice steady. "I had to be the man you weren't." Henry nodded, tears slipping down his cheek. "And that's what haunts me every day." Then, slowly, Oliver reached out and held his father's hand. "Don't ask me to forget," he said quietly. "Just don't leave again." Henry gripped his hand. Weakly, a faint smile trembling on his lips. "I won't." In that still room, under the dim hospital light, there were no grand speeches, no miracles, just two people, finally facing what had been. Left unfinished. Outside, life went on as usual. Inside, something unseen began to heal. Chapter 2. The Illness and the Memories. The fever came without warning, like an uninvited guest. Henry woke up in the middle of the night, his head spinning, sweat soaking his forehead, feeling as though something invisible was pressing hard against his chest. This time it was different from the usual coughing fits, deeper, heavier, relentless. He called the nurse in a hoarse whisper, and soon came the hurried footsteps, the drip of medicine, the soft reassurances that sounded far away. Everything outside seemed to drift into distance. Inside him, memories surged like waves crashing against the rocky shore of old age, breaking into white foam. Lying in his hospital bed, Henry stared at the ceiling, stained with the marks of time. The steady rhythm of the breathing machine, the ticking clock in the hallway. Together they formed a bridge to the past. As a child, he used to imagine the ceiling stains were maps to unknown lands. Now, with failing eyes and a weary mind, he saw them as maps of his mistakes. He remembered the morning of his youth when he decided to leave, carrying a handful of excuses he didn't even believe in. Ambition, fear, the illusion of a brighter horizon. He saw Margaret and their little boy standing at the doorway, eyes glistening. And then the door closing, his shadow fading into the rainy night. That image was carved deep in his mind, now playing again in slow motion. Each heartbeat pulled another memory from the dark. Henry saw himself young again. Black hair, calloused hands, the laughter-filled nights with drinking buddies, the careless charm of strange women. He saw the selfishness he once called freedom, The word opportunity, now swelling like a wound that had swallowed years of someone else's life. He remembered the unsent letters, the apologies bitten back, the forgotten promises. And for the first time, he truly understood that his leaving hadn't been light. It was a wound, one that had echoed through others' lives for decades. Oliver appeared more often in his thoughts. Henry remembered the boy's small arms wrapping around his neck after dinner, the mischievous eyes when he hid a cookie in his mother's pocket. He remembered the laughter, the innocent questions, the way the child looked at him as if he were a hero. And then, as his absence grew, that laughter turned into silence. He saw Margaret working late into the night, her hands rough, her eyes swollen from tears. The memories overlapped like reels of an old film. Only this time, he wasn't the proud lead. He was the one who ran away, the one who broke the story. The illness fractured both his body and his spirit. Lying in bed day after day, Henry began to hear the quiet voices in his heart. One night, as his fever eased, he heard a whisper, part dream, part memory. You left us. You left her. You didn't keep your word. He didn't argue. The old excuses were like torn scraps of paper, scattered in the corners of his mind, too damaged to repair. One morning, as weak sunlight crept through the curtain, a nurse handed him a postcard. Someone left this for you, she said softly. Henry opened it with trembling hands. Inside, just a few words. We heard you're feeling better. Take care. No name. Still, something warm and unfamiliar passed through him. Not forgiveness, but the feeling of being remembered. He didn't know who had sent it. Somewhere deep down, he wondered if Oliver knew, if this was a sign of something changing. In his fever, memories were not only punishment, they were glimpses of the goodness he had abandoned. One afternoon, Henry dreamt he and Oliver were walking by the river. The sun shimmered on the water. The boy held his father's hand and said, "Tell me a story, Dad." It felt so real that when he woke up, he wept. The nurse found him crying and asked, "Are you in pain?" Henry shook his head. He couldn't say the boy's name. His tears were not from illness, but from regret. The memories came with scents. The smell of bread Margaret used to bake, the ink on the letters he never sent, the faint shampoo on Oliver's hair when he was small. Smells, more than words, carried truth. He remembered that moment when little Oliver clung to him at the door, pleading, "Don't go, Dad." He had thought it was just a child's whim, but now he knew it was the voice of love begging not to be abandoned. That tiny voice echoed louder than any sermon. The illness forced him to see what he had avoided all his life. One evening, he looked into the window reflection, an old man with graying hair, hollow eyes, and a tired face. He saw a pattern repeating, leaving, regretting, aging alone. He realized one could run from responsibility, but never from memory. Memory followed like a shadow that only grew longer over time. During a doctor's visit, he heard about a possible surgery. "Would you like to undergo it?" the doctor asked gently. Henry stared at the ceiling. He thought of all the things left unsaid, undone. Maybe a few extra months would be enough, not to live longer, but to make peace. "I want to live," he said quietly, "so I can make things right." When Oliver learned that his father was hospitalized, a storm rose within him. Anger, confusion, a trace of pity he tried to suppress. He came to visit, standing stiffly at the bedside. Henry looked at him with a fragile mix of shame and hope. "Son, I know I was wrong," he whispered. Oliver replied coldly, "You left. You don't get to ask for anything." His words were sharp, but behind them was the voice of a child who once cried for his father. In the following days, Henry's thoughts turned to the moments he missed. The first time Oliver rode a bike, the scraped knees, the school ceremonies, the birthdays spent without him. Each scene hit like a confession. He realized that loneliness had not been a punishment. It had been his choice. Sometimes his mind wandered to what might have been if he had stayed, worked harder, taught his son kindness, chosen family over pride. These visions felt like alternate lives, doors he never opened. Yet within that regret grew a spark, the desire to use what time he had left to make amends. That spark became his only source of light. One night, in a dream, he saw his own mother standing in the doorway, older now, waiting. She said nothing, only placed her hand on his shoulder and whispered, "Go back, my son. Go back and make it right." When he woke, his pillow was wet with tears. For the first time in decades, he felt something shift, not fear, but courage to face what he had done. From that day, Henry began to write letters to Oliver, to Margaret, to himself. He wrote about the day he left, the nights of guilt, the faces that haunted him. He wrote not to justify, but to tell the truth. His handwriting shook, but each word was a step toward redemption. One afternoon, Oliver found him, writing, and asked, "What are you doing?" Henry handed him a page. "I'm writing what I've done, for you to know. You can read it when you're ready." Oliver skimmed the page, his face unreadable. Then he folded it and said, "Keep it here. I'll read it someday." It wasn't forgiveness, but it wasn't rejection either, a door slightly ajar. The illness had slowed everything down. But that slowness gave Henry time to face himself. Each wave of pain stripped away a layer of pretense, revealing something fragile yet honest. He knew suffering didn't erase his sins, but it could purify his will to do good. And as Oliver left the room that day, Henry whispered after him, "If I wake up tomorrow, I'll still be here, waiting." Oliver didn't respond, but his eyes, for the first time, softened. That night, Henry lay in silence, listening to the soft hum of the machines. In his dream, Oliver was small again, tugging at his sleeve beneath a tree, smiling. It was a simple image, but it told him everything. To see that smile again, he must first dare to face his own mistakes. When morning came, Henry called for the nurse. His voice was faint, but steady. "Could you call Oliver for me?" he asked. "I need to talk to him one more time." Chapter 3. The Final Letter. A Father's Apology and a Son's Timely Return. Henry sat in the dim hospital room, his frail hands trembling as he carefully shaped each word. Blank sheets of paper lay neatly before him. The old pen he had kept since his youth now felt like a sacred object, a bridge to say what he had never dared to before. He wrote slowly, each line carrying a weight, as if speaking aloud might cause his memories to vanish. "My dear son," he began, then paused, staring at the words as if he could feel their warmth through the page. He continued, "I was wrong. I left you and your mother when you needed me most. I have no right to ask for anything, but I need you to know that every day since then, I've lived with regret. I just wish to see you once, to say I'm sorry, truly sorry." Each stroke of his pen carried the ache of years. He remembered little Oliver clinging to his mother, searching for a father's hand that never reached back. He remembered how Margaret worked through sleepless nights to keep them alive. Every sentence he wrote felt like gathering shards of a broken mirror, but he knew no letter could ever glue the past back together. "Still," he went on, "I don't expect forgiveness. I only ask for a chance to stay, to take responsibility, to do something for you, for your family, for the wounds I've caused." When he finished, he signed his name and sealed the envelope with trembling fingers. Under the soft hospital light, his figure looked small, like a man folding an entire life into one last letter. He called the nurse and handed it to her. "Please," he said weakly, "make sure this reaches my son. Don't let it be lost." The nurse nodded, moved by the sincerity in his voice. Days passed slowly. Henry waited, afraid of both silence and reply. He told himself that even if Oliver never came, at least the act of writing had meaning. It was confession, redemption in its smallest form. Yet each time he looked at the door, a fragile hope rose again. When the letter finally left the hospital, Henry stared at the window for hours, imagining his son's face when he read it. He wondered if Oliver would be angry, if he would tear it apart, or if, by some miracle, he would understand. The letter reached Oliver one rainy afternoon. He was at work, buried in deadlines, when the postman knocked. The handwriting on the envelope stopped him cold, oddly familiar. He hesitated, then opened it. "If you wish, come see me. I would like to stay," the letter said after pages of humble, trembling words. No excuses, no manipulation, just an old man's raw admission. Oliver's heart tightened. For years, he had built walls around the wound his father left. The nights of his mother's quiet tears, the birthdays with an empty chair. Yet this letter felt different. There was something honest in the simplicity, something human that broke through resentment. He looked at his wife and 2 children. His daughter was coloring on the floor, her face glowing with innocent light. A thought rose. If my father died tonight and I never went, would I feel free? or forever unfinished? That question made the decision for him. Oliver grabbed his coat, called his mother, and said, "Mom, I'm going to the hospital." Margaret froze for a second, her eyes wet. "Go, son," she whispered. "Be calm." When Oliver entered the hospital room, he stopped at the doorway. Henry looked up from his bed. Their eyes met, a silence thicker than years. Henry reached out a trembling hand. "Son, I'm sorry," he whispered. "I know it can't undo anything. I just want to stay." Oliver stood still for a long time. He saw the tubes, the machines, the fragility of the man before him. "You left us," he said softly. "You left Mom to struggle alone. Do you think sorry fixes that?" Henry bowed his head, tears sliding down his face. "No, but I can still choose not to run anymore." The room went silent again. The air felt heavy. But inside Oliver something began to shift, not forgiveness yet, but the faintest willingness to look at the man not as a villain, but as a broken human being. Finally, Oliver sighed and sat beside the bed. He took his father's hand. "Stay then. Don't run again. If you really want to make it right, start with something small." Henry's lips trembled into a smile. "I will," he said, voice thin but steady. "I'll do everything I can." From that day, Oliver visited often. He helped his father with doctor visits, shared quiet tea breaks, and walked him through the hospital garden. They didn't speak much about the past, but the silence between them began to soften. One afternoon, Henry handed Oliver a small card. "I kept this all these years," he said. Oliver looked down, the handwriting shaky, the signature crooked. H. Collins. He smiled faintly, not out of joy, but out of acceptance. The beginning of something fragile, but real. The story closes on a quiet image. Oliver's hand resting on his father's shoulder, both looking out the window as the sunset bathed the room in gold. "We'll start from here," Oliver said softly. Henry smiled through tears. Outside, the evening light spread like forgiveness itself, slow, tender, and enough. Forgiveness is not just a gift you give to others. It is a blessing you offer to yourself. Each story in 7 Buddhist stories about forgiveness that will move you to tears is a reflection of the path toward liberation from hatred, of people who once sank in pain but rose again through compassion. When we learn to let go, the past is no longer a burden. It becomes a teacher that helps us grow, soften, and find freedom within. Perhaps inside every heart lies an old wound, someone we still cannot forgive, maybe even ourselves. But if you try, just once, to open your heart, to set that resentment down, you'll feel the wound begin to heal, and peace will quietly return, like still water after a storm. If these stories touched something deep within you, share them, so that the light of forgiveness may spread even further. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, so we can continue this journey together, exploring Buddhist stories filled with compassion, where every tear shed becomes a seed of awakening. There are wounds, invisible